North Atlantic, May 24, 1941, before dawn. The sea is a cold, heaving expanse of steel-grey water, whipped by wind and rain. Waves crash violently against a massive shadow cutting through the storm. At over 50,000 tons, she doesn't fear the ocean, she dominates it. The German battleship Bismarck. Her lookouts scan the darkness as radar screens flicker inside armored compartments. The crew feels both pride and pressure. This ship is not just metal and artillery, it is Germany's promise to break Britain's lifeline. Far away, aboard the British battlecruiser HMS Hood, sailors brace for combat under blackened sky. She is the Royal Navy's pride, undefeated for decades, the mighty Hood. Tonight, she races across the waves to intercept a threat like no other. On the bridge of each vessel, commanders steel their nerves. Orders are crisp, every second is critical. Through binoculars, faint gun flashes pierce the horizon. A heartbeat of silence, then thunder erupts across the sea. Shells scream into darkness, the world watches two giants collide. One will not survive this morning. And the story of why they met here begins long before this battle. To understand how the Bismarck came to threaten the very heart of Britain's survival, we must go back to the final hours of the First World War. Germany's proud Imperial Navy, once considered a rival to the British Royal Navy, lay shattered and humiliated. The Treaty of Versailles stripped Germany of its battleships, submarines, and shipyards capable of producing capital ships. Naval aviation was forbidden. Even the number of sailors permitted to serve was painfully limited. But resentment has a way of fueling ambition. By the 1930s, Adolf Hitler seized absolute control in Germany. He promised to restore national pride, rebuild military might, and challenge old enemies. In secret at first, and openly later, Germany began rearming. Its naval leaders envisioned a new fleet that could break British dominance at sea. This plan was called Plan Z. It demanded aircraft carriers, cruisers, and massive battleships able to dominate the open Atlantic. At the center of this dream stood a single vessel, one that would combine speed, firepower, and armor in a form the world had never seen. That vessel was Bismarck. Her construction began in 1936 at the Blohm and Voss shipyard in Hamburg. Piece by piece, German engineers assembled a floating fortress. 815-inch 38 cm, guns capable of destroying any ship at extreme range. Thick armor belts up to 320, resistant to British shells. Advanced fire control systems using optical rangefinders and centralized targeting. Top speed over 30 knots, thanks to massive, efficient turbine engines. She was the largest battleship ever launched by Germany. More importantly, she represented a rebirth of German naval power. Launched in February 1939, she slid from dry dock to the cheers of thousands. Nazi officials watched proudly. This was more than a warship. It was propaganda cast in steel, a symbol meant to intimidate opponents and inspire loyalty at home. Her crew, more than 2,200 sailors, trained relentlessly. Many were young, but disciplined, fiercely committed to their duty. The ship's captain, Ernst Lindemann, was seasoned, respected, and determined to prove his command worthy of such a titan. Germany needed a way to strike Britain, where the island nation was most vulnerable. Its supply lines. Britain, surrounded by water, relied on supplies from North America: fuel, food, weapons, raw materials. A single gap in those lifelines could starve the nation and cripple its armies. German submarines, U-boats, were already hunting convoys in the Atlantic. But a battleship like Bismarck could wreak devastation far faster, sinking escorted vessels with overwhelming gunpower, forcing Britain to stretch its navy thin to guard every convoy. A surface raider mission was planned. Bismarck would break into the Atlantic, accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, and unleash destruction on merchant shipping. The operation was codenamed. But even as Bismarck prepared for war, another giant watched. The Royal Navy, though strained and agging in areas, remained the largest naval force on Earth. British leaders understood the threat instantly. If Bismarck reached the open Atlantic, disaster could follow. So Britain tracked every radio message, every reconnaissance report, every rumor. Coastal watchers scanned the horizon. Aircraft patrolled the North Sea. The British home fleet, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, stood ready to intercept anything that moved. London knew Germany's silent promise: break Britain's supply lines and break Britain. By early May 1941, the Kriegsmarine judged the moment right. Repairs were finished, fuel tanks were full, orders were signed. The gateway to the Atlantic, the narrows between Iceland and Greenland, waited like a narrow crack in a fortress wall. The crew boarded, hatches sealed, engines rumbled to life. The battleship Bismarck was finally ready to leave her harbor and challenge an empire at sea. And that decision would trigger one of the most desperate naval pursuits in modern history. The storm clouds of the Atlantic awaited. The hunters and the hunted were about to take their first step into the abyss. On the night of May 18, 1941, Bismarck slipped away from her berth in Gotenhafen. Escort vessels guided her toward the Baltic Sea, where she rendezvoused with Prince Eugen. For a brief moment, the massive battleship seemed just another shape in the night, quiet, composed, determined. The mission was simple in theory: break into the North Atlantic undetected, sink merchant convoys, strangle Britain. In practice, it was a race against time and against the Royal Navy's unmatched surveillance network. Britain monitored the Baltic with aircraft and listening posts, and German movements rarely went unnoticed. By May 20, a Swedish cruiser sighted Bismarck. Word reached London within hours. What had been suspicion became confirmation. The Bismarck was at sea. Within the Admiralty, alarms triggered urgent calculations. Which convoys were in danger? Which ships could intercept? Where would Bismarck strike first? The Royal Navy deployed everything within range. Every day of the war, more than 50,000 tons of supplies crossed the ocean to Britain. Oil from America, wheat from Canada, vehicles and ammunition for soldiers fighting in North Africa and Europe. Without these lifelines, Britain would fall. And now a single battleship, faster and more powerful than most Royal Navy capital ships, threatened to turn the Atlantic into a graveyard of burning freighters. No risk was greater, no threat more urgent. So Britain moved. The vessels selected to block the Northern Passage were iconic. HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, the symbol of British sea dominance. HMS Prince of Wales, a new battleship still working up. Not fully ready for combat, but needed desperately. These ships were ordered to intercept Bismarck north of Iceland, in the Denmark Strait, a narrow corridor of freezing storms and towering seas. If Bismarck broke through here, Britain might never catch her again. The British Home Fleet, under Admiral John Tovey, prepared for the chase. Cruisers spread out like a net across the ocean. Destroyers raced to refuel and redeploy. Coastal Command aircraft stretched their range to search the Arctic waters. Every radar pulse, every coded radio message, every shadow on the waves was examined with growing tension. Aboard Bismarck, Admiral Gunther Lütjens commanded the operation. Experienced yet cautious, he understood the magnitude of their mission, but he also carried scars, a deep distrust of high-risk surface actions. He preferred avoiding combat with enemy capital ships. Hitler's orders reinforced that. Do not engage if possible, focus on merchants. Yet as they pushed north, bad weather wrapped the ships in fog and freezing spray. The heavy seas tore at the hull plating, ice built up on deck railings. Lookouts squinted into blinding snow. Radar struggled in the storm. Germany had built one of the most powerful battleships in history. But her eyes were often limited by nature itself. British warships, however, carried more advanced radar systems with superior range and reliability. In the coming hours, that difference would prove deadly. By the night of May 23, British cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk made radar contact in the Denmark Strait. The hunters had found the prey and instantly became the hunted. Bismarck opened fire, forcing the cruisers to pull back, but they never lost contact. They shadowed the German ships, reporting position updates every few minutes. The fuse was lit. Messages rushed between Royal Navy vessels. Enemy in sight. On the open sea, the atmosphere tightened. Sailors on both sides prepared ammunition stores. Damage control crews listened for the first call to action stations. The battle was coming. HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales churned through the storm toward the enemy. Engines strained, decks trembled. Officers plotted interception courses by dim red lighting. No one aboard those British ships doubted the stakes. If Bismarck escaped into the Atlantic, if she slaughtered conv after conv, the war could tilt in Germany's favor. This mission wasn't just about ships. It was about survival. Ahead lay dawn. And with the rising sun, the clash of titans that would change naval history forever. The Royal Navy had found Bismarck. Now they only needed to stop her. From the moment Bismarck left port, she carried with her a fearsome arsenal unmatched by most Allied ships of the era. Her main battery, 8 15-inch 38 cm guns housed in 4 turrets, could send armor-piercing shells more than 20 miles across the sea. Each round weighed nearly a ton, capable of tearing open the hull of any warship afloat. But it wasn't just raw power. Her armor layout was carefully engineered, a turtleback design. Thick main belt armor protected the vital machinery and ammunition magazines. Deck armor and internal bulkheads formed layers that could deflect incoming shells downward, dissipating their force. Engineers had created a fortress that moved. A battleship designed to withstand hits long enough to deliver fatal blows in return. Even her fire control system represented modern precision, combining optical rangefinders with stabilized director towers to keep targets locked even in rough seas. Against many British ships, this technological edge was overwhelming. And the Royal Navy knew it. Every ship is ultimately defined by its crew. Aboard Bismarck, the sailors lived in orderly steel corridors smelling of oil and machinery. Their training was strict, their discipline sharp. Many were young men, eager to serve what their leaders told them was a righteous cause to restore Germany's honor after decades of humiliation. They believed their ship was invincible. That belief would soon be tested. On the British side, sailors aboard HMS Hood carried a very different kind of pride. Hood wasn't just a warship, she was a national icon, the might of empire cast in armor. Many of her crew had grown up hearing that the Royal Navy ruled the waves, undefeated and unquestioned. But there was tension beneath that confidence. Hood was launched in 1918, a World War I veteran. Her armor protection, particularly on the decks, was outdated against plunging fire from modern battleships. Crews knew this. Some whispered their fears in quiet corners below deck, yet orders were orders, and duty allowed no hesitation. For the young sailors on both sides, the sea held no political ideology. It held survival or death. Britain had more to lose. The fate of millions depended on ships crossing the Atlantic every week. Every torpedoed freighter meant rationing grew tighter. Every lost tanker meant fewer aircraft and tanks fighting in North Africa. That is why Admiral Sir Dudley Pound, First Sea Lord, gave a simple directive. The destruction of the Bismarck is the first priority in naval operations. Other missions were delayed, fleets were repositioned, fuel reserves tapped. The entire focus shifted to one ship, because if Bismarck succeeded, she could cripple Britain's ability to continue the war. The Royal Navy was no longer merely a guardian of the sea. It was Britain's heartbeat, and the Bismarck had come to stop that heart. Admiral Gunther Lütjens did not have illusions about what lay ahead. Germany's navy, though technologically advanced, was small compared to Britain's. The Kriegsmarine could not win a direct war of fleet versus fleet. Instead, they needed to bleed Britain slowly, like a hunter weakening a stronger rival. Surface raiders like Bismarck were a bold move. Strike fast, vanish into the ocean, force the enemy to scramble. Done successfully, this could stretch the Royal Navy across thousands of miles of ocean, weakening Britain's convoy escorts and giving U-boats room to strike. But it carried enormous risk. One mistake, one lucky hit, one miscalculation, and a capital ship would be lost. A blow Germany could not easily replace. Bismarck sailed to break the Empire's supply line. Hood sailed to prove the Empire could not be broken. Technology, emotion, strategy, and fear all converged on a single point on the map: the Denmark Strait. The moment had come when two world powers, represented by two giants of steel, would fire the first shots of a confrontation that would echo through history. And when the guns finally spoke, the world would witness how swiftly power can shift. The next angle reveals the larger story behind that gunfire. In the empty vastness of the North Atlantic, the most powerful weapon was not a battleship cannon, but information. The Royal Navy had learned this hard lesson during years of tracking U-boats. Radar, radio interception, code breaking, these became essential tools of survival. British cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk had something Bismarck lacked: surface search radar with strong performance in rough seas. Even in blinding sleet, they held contact. Every course change Bismarck made, they reported. Every attempt to escape into the mist, they countered. This was a turning point in naval warfare. For centuries, eyes had been the scout. Now electromagnetic pulses extended vision beyond the horizon. For Germany, this was a painful disadvantage. Their reliance on optical spotting, excellent in clear conditions, was crippled by the storm. Radar existed on board, but did not match British capabilities nor match the ocean's wild mood. The future of naval war had arrived, and it favored Britain. HMS Hood represented the greatest traditions of British naval pride: lightning-fast strikes, aggressive engagement, forcing the enemy to bow. British commanders respected their enemy, but believed decisive action would prevail. The Royal Navy had long followed a doctrine: close the range, hit hard, trust gunnery. It had worked for generations. But the nature of battleships had changed. Engagements now happened at long ranges, where shells arced high before descending steeply, striking decks rather than hull belts. Hood's weak deck armor made closing distance a double-edged sword. On Bismarck's side, a new doctrine: hit from afar, use precision, maintain protection. Captain Ernst Lindemann understood this perfectly. He insisted on standing and fighting, not merely fleeing to sink merchant ships. He believed the Bismarck was built for battle against the world's strongest navies. Lütjens hesitated. His orders discouraged risky engagements. But fate pushed both men into conflict. The sea gave them no alternative. The British were already coming. Some ships carry more than sailors. They carry national identity. For Germany, Bismarck embodied a promise: that the humiliation of Versailles was temporary, that German engineering could once again intimidate Europe, that the Reich could stand equal to the British Empire. Her loss would be a devastating blow to propaganda. For Britain, Hood was a legend. Children knew her name. Newspapers spoke of her like a guardian angel of empire. If Hood fell, the British public would feel it instantly, painfully. Confidence would falter. Enemies would rejoice. These weren't just warships. They were message bearers. When they met in the Denmark Strait, the battle would not only be military, it would be psychological. And the shockwaves of that moment would circle the world. The Denmark Strait, grey skies, icy wind, sea spray hammering steel. The distance between the two forces shrinks fast as they cut through the waves. Two British ships against the most powerful battleship Germany has ever built. HMS Hood, HMS Prince of Wales versus Bismarck, Prince Eugen. The British open fire first. A deep, thunderous roar shakes the ocean as Hood's forward turrets unleash a salvo. Bright streaks tear through the air, trailing smoke, rushing toward the German ships. Prince of Wales follows a heartbeat later, still new, still plagued by mechanical faults, but determined to fight. The Germans respond. Inside Bismarck, gun crews confirm range and bearing. Target, HMS Hood, the pride of Britain, the order is given. Bismarck's main battery fires. The resulting shockwave rattles bolts and steel. Men brace themselves against the blast and falling dust. 8 shells claw upward, then descend at terrifying speed. The distance is still long. Early salvos overshoot. Shells crash into the sea, sending towering columns of white water skyward. Both sides correct aim. Both prepare for the killing blow. British Admiral Holland orders a sharp turn. Hood must close the distance fast. Her deck armor cannot withstand plunging fire from long range. But this maneuver exposes her broadside just as both German ships find their mark. Prince Eugen's shells are first to hit. Fires erupt along Hood's wooden decks near her boat's storage. The blaze spreads quickly, feeding on dry timbers and fuel. Damage control races to respond, but time is already slipping away. Bismarck adjusts aim. Fire control officers confirm the trajectory. Target locked. Another German salvo launches with brutal precision. A shell arcs high, then plunges downward like fate itself. It pierces Hood's thin deck armor and buries into the ammunition magazine beneath her aft turrets. For a half-second, there is silence. Then hell opens. A blinding explosion erupts through Hood's center. Flames hundreds of feet tall engulf the ship. Steel tears apart like paper. The blast is so violent that the vessel's structure collapses. In moments, mere moments, the mighty Hood breaks in two. The forward section rises briefly above the surface, split and burning. The stern disappears in a boiling mix of fire and shattered metal. Nearly 1,418 sailors vanish beneath the Arctic waters. Only 3 men survive. The pride of the Royal Navy gone. The British sailors watching from Prince of Wales stand frozen. Training snaps them back to action just as another German salvo slams into their hull. Machinery fails, turrets jam, smoke floods compartments. The new battleship, under deadly fire, is still too incomplete for a sustained fight. Still, she keeps firing, defiant. But Admiral Holland is dead. Hood has vanished. Prince of Wales cannot stand alone. Her captain orders a retreat, laying a smokescreen, disappearing into the storm. The gunfire fades. The air still trembles with the memory of explosions. The world has just shifted. On Bismarck's bridge, Captain Lindemann quietly announces, "Hood is sinking." The German crew erupts in cheers. Victory feels total, unstoppable. They have slain Britain's greatest warship. But Admiral Lutyens remains stern. He knows what this means. Britain will never forgive this blow. They will never stop hunting Bismarck now. And he is right. News reaches London almost immediately. Signals officers confirm the unthinkable. Hood destroyed. Massive loss of life. Enemy battleship still at large. Behind closed doors, shock and fury pulse through the Admiralty. Hood wasn't just a warship, she was a national symbol. Now she lies at the bottom of the sea. The message arrives from Winston Churchill himself, simple and absolute. Sink the Bismarck. The hunt transforms into obsession. Britain mobilizes every available ship, aircraft, and weapon. The largest naval pursuit of the war begins. Bismarck has won a battle, but she has also sealed her fate. Her moment of triumph has made her the most hunted ship on Earth. The next chapter is not about victory. It is about a desperate race for escape. After the devastation in the Denmark Strait, Bismarck and Prince Eugen slipped into the stormy North Atlantic. The German crew, still elated from sinking Hood, began damage assessments. Funnels were cleared of smoke, decks cleared of debris. The sense of invincibility lingered, though Lucian's calm demeanor kept the crew wary. Because every action now had consequences. British forces were relentless. Every cruiser and destroyer, every carrier-launched reconnaissance plane was now focused entirely on Bismarck. Admiralty orders ensured that the entire home fleet was converging to trap the battleship before she could reach the safety of occupied France. The hunt had escalated from a single engagement to a vast, ocean-spanning pursuit. On May 26, as Bismarck steamed west toward the French coast, HMS Royal launched Fairey Swordfish biplanes in an early morning attack. The planes, slow and vulnerable, carried only a handful of torpedoes, but the element of surprise and daring courage was their greatest weapon. Bismarck's anti-aircraft defenses opened fire. Flak shells streaked the sky. One swordfish was destroyed in flames. Another spiraled into the sea, but luck and precision favored the attackers. A torpedo found its mark. Bismarck's rudder was jammed. The ship could still move forward at reduced speed, but steering was crippled. For the first time, the crew realized escape was no longer possible. The mood shifted from triumph to tense realization. The hunter had become the hunted, and the prey could no longer maneuver to evade. At 8:47 a.m., British battleships and cruisers closed in, King George V, Rodney, and a flotilla of destroyers. The North Atlantic wind howled, waves towering over the decks. Visibility was poor, yet the gunfire roared across miles of ocean with terrifying precision. Bismarck returned fire, her main battery targeting the nearest enemy vessels. Shells struck water close to British ships, sending geysers of spray and shrapnel into the air. Yet her crippled rudder meant she could not bring her guns to bear effectively or maintain evasive maneuvers. Over hours of relentless bombardment, the German crew fought desperately. Fires raged along the deck. Smoke choked compartments, flooding threatened magazines. Every repair team worked against the clock, knowing survival was unlikely. By 10:39 a.m., Bismarck had absorbed hundreds of shell hits. Her forward turrets were destroyed. The aft turrets, still operational, fired desperately. Men on deck tried to man secondary guns even as explosions tore through compartments. Finally, the battleship slipped beneath the waves. The Atlantic swallowed her with more than 2,000 sailors, leaving only a fraction to be rescued by British destroyers hours later. Prince Eugen, detached earlier to escape, survived, but Bismarck, once the pride of Germany, was gone. The symbol of naval engineering, the terror of Britain's Atlantic lifelines, vanished in a roar of guns, smoke, and fire. The British Royal Navy had avenged Hood. The hunt had cost no major British ships, though lives were still lost in destroyers and aircraft operations. Morale soared in Britain, and Churchill noted that the destruction of Bismarck was both a military victory and a symbolic triumph. For Germany, the loss was profound. Not only was a capital ship sunk, but the Kriegsmarine surface fleet was permanently weakened. The notion that Germany could contest Britain's command of the seas with battleships alone was shattered. And yet the story of Bismarck did not end in the Atlantic. Her sinking became legend, a lesson in technological ambition, human courage, and the limits of naval power. The North Atlantic was eerily quiet after the guns fell silent. Smoke from burning ships and the acrid smell of cordite lingered in the air. For hours, only the waves broke the silence, carrying debris and the remnants of human lives far from sight. The Royal Navy had achieved its immediate goal. The Bismarck was sunk, yet the victory came with a somber weight. Over 2,000 German sailors had perished, men who mere days earlier had celebrated what they believed to be an unstoppable ship. Only about 115 survived, rescued by British destroyers under dangerous conditions in the open Atlantic. Their stories would later describe chaos, fire, and fear, but also astonishing discipline in the face of imminent death. On the British side, grief and relief were intertwined. HMS Hood had been obliterated in the Denmark Strait. Its loss, 1,418 sailors killed, was the single largest naval tragedy for Britain in World War II. The survivors, only 3 men, bore witness to the instant destruction of a national symbol. Prince of Wales, though damaged, had survived its encounter with Bismarck, though shaken and battle-worn. The British press seized the narrative immediately. Hood's destruction was mourned, but Bismarck's sinking became the story the nation clung to. The Admiralty's communications emphasized triumph over terror, framing the event as proof that Britain's naval supremacy, though challenged, could endure. Winston Churchill, addressing the cabinet and the public indirectly through coded messages in dispatches, recognized both the sorrow and the significance. The Royal Navy had avenged its lost pride and maintained control of the Atlantic. From a military perspective, the battle offered immediate lessons. The vulnerability of older battleships like Hood to plunging fire highlighted the growing importance of deck armor against long-range artillery. Bismarck's own technological sophistication, massive guns, thick armor, and advanced fire control had proven formidable, but not invincible. Operational mistakes, particularly Lutyens' reluctance to disengage after Hood's destruction, would be studied in naval academies for decades. Aircraft reconnaissance and the torpedo strike from HMS Royal's swordfish planes demonstrated that battleships, no matter how powerful, could not operate without support. Radar technology and the coordination of multiple task forces had enabled the British to track and ultimately corner Bismarck, revealing a modern paradigm of combined arms in naval warfare. From a military perspective, the battle offered immediate lessons. The vulnerability of older battleships like Hood to plunging fire highlighted the growing importance of deck armor against long-range artillery. Bismarck's own technological sophistication, massive guns, thick armor, and advanced fire control had proven formidable, but not invincible. Operational mistakes, particularly Lutyens' reluctance to disengage after Hood's destruction, would be studied in naval academies for decades. Aircraft reconnaissance and the torpedo strike from HMS Royal's swordfish planes demonstrated that battleships, no matter how powerful, could not operate without support. Radar technology and the coordination of multiple task forces had enabled the British to track and ultimately corner Bismarck, revealing a modern paradigm of combined arms in naval warfare. The sinking of Bismarck also had profound psychological effects. For Britain, it was a vindication of resolve. The Royal Navy had lost a symbol, but it had destroyed the threat that imperiled the nation's survival. Confidence in naval intelligence and strategy soared. For Germany, the emotional blow was severe. The Kriegsmarine had invested enormous resources in building Bismarck, and the public viewed her as a tangible representation of German engineering and military ambition. Her loss, so soon after Hood's destruction, was a double-edged blow, pride tarnished and strategic capability reduced. The Kriegsmarine's surface fleet would never recover the ability to challenge the Atlantic in the same way. The immediate aftermath forced both navies to reassess their strategies. Germany's reliance on surface raiders was effectively curtailed. U-boats remained the primary instrument for Atlantic disruption, but no single capital ship would again carry the symbolic or operational weight Bismarck had. Britain, on the other hand, recognized the importance of aircraft carriers, radar, and reconnaissance. These elements would define the Royal Navy's operations for the remainder of the war. The hunt for Bismarck became a blueprint for integrating intelligence, naval firepower, and air support, lessons that extended well beyond the Atlantic campaign. As the storm-tossed waters of the North Atlantic calmed, the echoes of explosions faded, but the legacy of Bismarck and Hood remained. One ship had destroyed a national treasure. The other had cemented the idea that even the mightiest battleship could be hunted, cornered, and destroyed. The stage was set for a wider reflection on what this battle meant for strategy, technology, and human courage. For the Kriegsmarine, the consequences were immediate and profound. Bismarck had represented the apex of German surface fleet ambition. Her destruction left Germany without a capital ship capable of contesting the Atlantic. The remaining surface raiders were smaller cruisers, incapable of taking on Britain's battleships directly. Admiral Reeder and the High Command recognized that the dream of breaking Britain's supply lines through surface raids alone was over. From May 1941 onward, the focus shifted almost entirely to U-boats and submarines, a strategy that would define the Battle of the Atlantic. The psychological impact was equally severe. The German public, previously awed by Bismarck's power, now confronted the limitations of their navy in stark terms. Propaganda could no longer mask the fact that a single ship, no matter how advanced, could not dominate an ocean alone. Britain, by contrast, experienced both moral victory and operational reassurance. The Royal Navy had avenged Hood, demonstrated its capacity for relentless pursuit, and proven that coordination between ships, aircraft, and intelligence could overcome even the most formidable opponent. The lessons were seared into naval doctrine. Air reconnaissance and torpedo strikes could neutralize battleships faster than traditional gunnery. Radar and intelligence coordination were decisive, enabling a small number of ships to control vast expanses of ocean. Surface engagement alone was insufficient against modern warfare realities. Combined arms were now essential. These principles would influence not only Britain's Atlantic operations, but naval strategy worldwide for decades. The human cost was immense. Over 2,000 German sailors lost their lives. More than 1,400 British sailors aboard Hood were killed. For both sides, the ocean became a memorial, a grave for men whose fates were determined in moments of fire and steel. Yet there were moments of resilience and heroism. Survivors on both sides displayed courage under unimaginable conditions. Rescue operations by destroyers and patrol vessels, often in gale-force winds, exemplified the commitment to save lives even amid battle. These acts humanized a conflict defined by mechanical destruction, reminding the world that behind every warship were real people, men facing the most extreme tests of endurance and duty. Strategically, the Atlantic would remain contested, but Bismarck's loss marked a turning point. Germany's surface fleet would never again challenge Britain in a single, concentrated strike. The Royal Navy's command of the seas was reaffirmed, ensuring the survival of supply lines critical to Britain's war effort and ultimately to the liberation of occupied Europe. Bismarck's saga also left an indelible mark on naval engineering and military planning. Future battleships would integrate air defense, radar, and improved deck armor, lessons drawn directly from her brief but decisive career. The interplay of technology, human courage, and strategic decision-making observed during the hunt would serve as case studies in naval academies worldwide. The Atlantic's waters, once churned by the titanic duel of giants, now held only memory. Yet the story of Bismarck, her power, her destruction, and the human drama she carried, remained a lesson in ambition, vulnerability, and the relentless nature of modern war. The stage was now set for reflection. What did the rise and fall of Bismarck mean for history, for humanity, and for the art of naval warfare? The story of Bismarck is more than a tale of fire and steel. It is a testament to the ambitions, fears, and limits of human endeavor. A floating fortress, she embodied the pinnacle of German naval engineering, massive guns, impenetrable armor, and advanced technology that pushed the boundaries of what a battleship could be. Yet her fate revealed a fundamental truth. No matter how powerful, no weapon exists in isolation. Strategy, intelligence, and the human element ultimately determine survival. For Britain, Bismarck was both a warning and a vindication. The destruction of Hood had reminded the world that even the mightiest ship could fall in a single instant, but the relentless pursuit and eventual sinking of Bismarck reaffirmed the value of discipline, coordination, and technological foresight. Radar, reconnaissance, and aircraft attacks had rewritten the rules of naval warfare, signaling the decline of battleships as autonomous arbiters of the seas. For Germany, Bismarck's brief career was a harsh lesson in hubris and vulnerability. She was a symbol of national pride and industrial prowess, yet her loss underscored the perils of overconfidence, rigid command structures, and the unpredictable nature of war. Her sinking did not end the struggle for the Atlantic, but it ended an era, the age of the battleship, as the decisive instrument of naval supremacy. Beyond the steel and strategy, the human stories endure. Sailors on both sides faced unimaginable danger, fear, and loss. Courage and duty were tested in freezing waters and raging storms, where a single miscalculation could mean death. The Atlantic became a graveyard, a classroom, and a proving ground, reminding us that history is forged not only by machines, but by those who operate them under impossible circumstances. Bismarck's legacy lives on in the lessons she left behind: the evolution of naval technology, the integration of intelligence and air power, and the enduring courage of men at sea. Her story is a meditation on ambition and mortality, power and vulnerability, a chapter of World War II that continues to resonate long after the guns fell silent. And in the quiet of the Atlantic, beneath waves that once bore witness to thunderous artillery, her name still echoes, a reminder that history is written both by steel and by those who dare to command it.